This week, we are back. Most of us are back and hopefully fully recovered from our week in San Francisco, attending the RSA Conference, and at least for one of us, B-side San Francisco. Whether you attended or not, we thought we'd take our first segment today to reflect on our collective and individual experiences about the week out in at RSA. I've got a few things I'd like to bring up. I'm sure Matt and Scott do as well. Josh, you were on the fringe. You probably have some outside-in viewpoints as well. In our second segment, we'll catch up on the security and compliance news, including how to plan for pandemics, how compliance programs can help to create a better business culture, and the viewpoint that privacy versus security is the greatest contest ever. All this and more, so join us as we tear down silos and build bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Today's organizations face an evolving set of security threats and continually changing compliance requirements. As your business grows, privacy concerns only multiply and add to a dynamic set of priorities. Today's organizations need to integrate risk, security, and privacy into a cohesive program. Online Business Systems team of seasoned security practitioners work closely with you to assess your security posture, policies, procedures, and technologies, providing tailored solutions that are specifically aligned to your business's risk profile and ultimately ensure the protection of your brand. To learn more about Online Business Systems, go to securityweekly.com/online.
Welcome to episode 19 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on Super Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, coming to you remotely from Pasadena, Maryland. Joining me online are my esteemed co-hosts. I believe we're all remote today, Mr. Scott Lyons, Mr. Josh Marpet, and our CEO, Mr. Matt Alderman. Gentlemen, welcome. Everybody that was in San Francisco, everybody caught up on sleep and email and everything?
RSA is finally over, but now we get to talk about it.
We'll get to talk about it.
I just got to watch it from the sidelines. It was amazing watching everybody go crazy out in San Fran.
Well, we will hopefully have a decent discussion about it. I'm interested in hearing everybody's thoughts, impressions, experiences. Before we jump into it, we do have a few announcements, though. First, join us at InfoSec World 2020, which is March 30th through April 1st, 2020, at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners can save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. You can get that discount by visiting securityweekly.com/ISW2020. Click on the registration button for the registration, or you can schedule a micro interview. There's a scheduling button there as well. Also, the Ocean State Higher Education Economic Development and Administrative Network, which is OCEAN for short, and the Pell Center are partnering together to present Cybersecurity Exchange Day on Wednesday, March 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Sav Regina University in beautiful Newport, Rhode Island. Visit securityweekly.com/OCEAN, that's OSHEAN 2020, to register for free and come join the fun. Okay, enough of that. RSA recap, but don't say recap. It's reflections.
Is that sort of like saying PCI?
Yeah, kind of. Paul was saying something last week about how he hates doing a recap episode because everybody hates to hear a recap, but let's just reflect instead.
Yes, reflect.
RSA is always a really great time for vendors and business to, industry to come together and really get to talk about not only topics that are hot in the industry, things that are driving outside effectors, but also different thought process within different tool sets to be able to showcase new tool sets, to be able to define new methods of going over stuff and refresh and rehash old methods as well. A lot of times in our industry, unfortunately, RSA is referred to as vendor fest. right? Vendor Fest. So it's fun when you get all of those minds in one room and you start inducing thought, right? Jeff, what was your take when you were at RSA?
Well, I had several different takes, and one of the things I hope we discuss today is, I went to RSA primarily to walk the vendor floor and look for companies that either do something in terms of compliance, which in the vernacular, I think these days is used to be called governance, risk, and compliance. Nowadays, more often it's called integrated risk management. Whatever the buzzword is that talks about companies that help you deal with compliance. I was looking for companies like that, but I was also looking for companies that, since I see everything through a drink PCI lens, companies that have tools and solutions that satisfy specific PCI requirements, because I am fascinated how few companies actually know what they do to meet specific PCI requirements, or in general any other regulatory compliance requirements. And I know that that's probably a different reason why Matt was walking the floor, or Scott, you were walking the floor. So, one thing I hope we can discuss is sort of our different take based on our different going into it position, what we're trying to get out of it. What I got out of it personally was disappointment that so few companies know what they do to meet specific security compliance requirements. They tend to talk in generalities, and they tend to talk in sort of the buzz speak of whatever I assume their marketing teams have come up with in terms of what they should be talking about that's exciting and new. I've got a couple specific examples that we can talk about, but that's my sort of teaser going into it. Scott or Matt, what's your take? And then also Josh, your view from the outside, getting to chuckle at what we were experiencing.
Matt, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go, because, I go to the floor for very specific reasons, right? I go to see our existing sponsors, potential prospects, but I also like to see what's on the signs, right? And I one of the big things we've seen over the years is like buzzword bingo, where Paul and I are walking the floor and we literally look at the sign and we're like, I don't know what that says. I know every word in there, but I have no idea by stringing them together what you're actually saying. And so it gives us an opportunity to really look at this crazy, just like marketing messaging mayhem that is on the show floor. First of all,
our artificial intelligence, machine learning, buzzword bingo algorithm will do everything and anything you can imagine. And it's going to do it now. And it's going to do it amazingly. It's enormous. It's huge.
It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. And so then Paul and I have to try to figure out who is actually interesting to talk to in the halls when we walk through them. And we did find a couple little gems kind of towards the back or towards the sides. We did spend a lot of time up in Early Stage Expo. We like to see the innovation of what is coming. We found some really interesting solutions that will bring some of those people onto some of the different shows, just because they have some interesting technical expertise in certain areas. But, the other thing I noticed on the show floor, it was interesting to see some of the gaps, right? We had a few sponsors pull out of RSA Conference, big gap where IBM was going to be, and a couple others that pulled out. The rumor was attendance was down about 10,000. I don't know what the actual numbers are. It'll be interesting to see. A lot of people thought it was lighter than last year. We definitely had some vendor pull out. So the floor was a little different this year, but I do like having everything more consolidated this year than in previous years, where Early Stage Expo and the Innovation Sandbox are in the Marriott Marquis. It made it a lot easier to get over there. But, if I was on the floor 2 hours, Jeff, that was probably a lot for me.
Yeah, I think I did 3 hours the first day, and
it's just overwhelming, or what?
We had a schedule of other things going on, so I could only get over there. I got over there briefly on Wednesday, and Paul and I went over on Thursday together. But our schedules were pretty packed the rest of the week.
For those of us
Yeah,
who weren't
so
there, give us a
I
sense of
didn't.
perspective. How big is the expo floor?
Oh, it's massive. It's utterly massive. You have to
That's
imagine
not a
trying
sense
to
of scale.
slam three
So
to 700 vendors
no,
into
614
how
guys,
many?
614 vendors,
614.
There you go.
78 new, and most of those are in early stage expo because a lot of the new vendors show up in early stage expo first and then partially over into the floor. I think there's somewhere around 50 in early stage expo. Some have been in there before, but there's certain criteria you can't be there anymore. But the number I saw was 614. And so you basically, Josh, take Moscone North to
Right.
Moscone South and the entire walkway between them full of vendors.
Yeah.
So, a couple of football
Which, if
fields,
you've never
basically?
been there, there's no context.
That's what I'm going for.
If you've been to a major convention center in a major city, it's there's two buildings, Moscone North and South. Each of those are full-blown major city-sized convention centers where the floor space is, several football fields squared.
Yes.
And a couple of years ago they did some reconstruction, and they essentially connected the two and made them one big one. So it's like three, not 1, 2, but 3 convention centers in one. So I don't know what the square footage is, but 600 vendors that have a minimum of 10 foot by 10 foot, and the bigger ones, and there's quite a few of them have more like 40 by 40 foot spaces. It's a lot of humanity to get to navigate.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I really didn't notice IBM not being there. Right. In years past, IBM has always had a very huge display. Right. It's huge. It's bigly, to borrow words from somebody. But I didn't get the feeling like IBM was truly lost by not being there. Now, the revenue might not be there for RSA, but, it was still the same flavor. When you're talking about the Startup Alley, right? And you're talking about the main expo, there's a big difference in the start, and I'm getting the name wrong here, and I apologize, but in Startup
Early
Alley
stage
with those,
expo. Early stage expo.
they shoved 50 vendors in the room in a 2x2 space, right? And each vendor is trying to put 3 people in a 2x2 space. So as you're walking through it, the common thread is, hey, let me show you my demo. And you're like, no, back to the kitchen with you, go away from me, right? So when I was going through it, I had a completely different experience than you did, Matt and Jeff. My experience was, I don't really care about your buzzwords. What I want to know, right? What I really want to know, and this is helping to get down to brass tacks, is what are the top 3 things you do? And more importantly, why should I care? Right? And trying to get vendors, even the normal vendors, trying to get them to elicit the why should I care is teeth pulling. It is maniacally bad, right? Whether you're a marketing person, a engineer, or a C-level exec, you should always be able to get that why across. And there were vendors clear across the board that were really struggling with it. But one vendor that did stick out, right, in that new vendor space was PlexTrack, right? PlexTrack,
Really?
for those of you who don't know who they are, they're a company that allows you to display, track, and metric vulnerabilities and pen test results against your organization.
Okay, why do you think they stood out?
Say that again.
Did they stand out because of their marketing material was buzzword free? Did they stand out because they had the coolest colors and shiny things? Or did they stand out because you went, oh my God, this is really cool technology and I want to play with this?
All of the above, but most importantly, they could get the why across and how it would affect not only our clients, Josh, right, our clients and customers, but how it would affect other organizations and why it actually matters. When we're going through as tech people, we don't want to see a demo. We don't want to hear your buzzword bingo, right? What we want is the why, right? The why is the most important. That's because it allows us to buy into your dream of your product. Right. So if we at conferences were smarter as security and compliance personnel and saying, OK, get to the why, it would really help these companies produce less buzzword bingo and more sustenance.
Agreed.
At least that's in my own
100%.
humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Quick question for Matt and Scott. Did either of you attend any talks or sessions?
I did
No.
not.
They have talks at these things?
Yeah, they
No.
do.
They do.
No.
Well,
No.
Paul
See,
and
a
I
lot
had
of
full
people, a lot of
conference
people go
badges.
to
We
the
just didn't
talks.
have the time.
Yeah, well, a lot of people go to the talks, and the talks offer some really great value, right? But with, like Matt said, with everything going on, you want to be sure that you're spending your time equally across the board, right? And more oftentimes than not, when I go to a conference like, say, DEF CON, Black Hat, I'm not going for the talks. I'm going to network. I'm going to try to see what business is out there, right?
Right.
Some of our greatest friends give absolutely wonderful talks. You won't catch me in them.
I
have one more quick point from RSA Conference, right? In the other thing I always like to watch is Innovation Sandbox, which is the event that's on Monday. And because you bring 10 new startup companies in, you allow them to pitch for 3 minutes. I think it's a great event. I didn't get a chance to go over this year because we had some interviews. But what astounded me is two points. One was 6 of the 10 vendors were all focused around application security, which I thought was interesting to have a large concentration in AppSec in the Innovation Sandbox for those pitches this year. But the company that won was privacy related. And that is 2 out of the last 3 years, a privacy vendor has won the Innovation Sandbox, which tells you privacy has definitely been on the minds of the panelists and other folks, where two of the last 3 years, privacy companies have won. Axonius won the year before, which was on the asset management side, asset discovery and inventory side. So that, there's just some interesting things that you see coming out, that privacy is definitely getting a lot more visibility at RSA Conference, and now you've seen a couple privacy vendors winning the Innovation Sandbox.
Well, and there's, that begs several questions, I guess, chicken and the egg type of scenarios. Why? Why is privacy becoming a thing? I think there's an argument to be made that privacy and security are unrelated. Certainly, there's a better argument, I think, that they are related somehow. But I guess, the traditional thinking, at least in my mind, was security is more how companies and organizations tackle this thing that we do, which is manage risk, whereas privacy is more consumer oriented. And clearly those worlds are colliding, not the least of which being the reason that there's so many more privacy related regulations coming out, like GDPR and CCPA and others. So do you see it as being is it fish or cut bait, sink or swim? Why do you think the emphasis is now on privacy?
Well, so you hit 2 of them, right? I think the reason Big ID wins a couple of years ago is because of GDPR and all the challenges around figuring out where your data was, classifying it in order to put privacy around it. Okay, now you got CCPA, so now you've got a U.S. driver as well as a European driver. So obviously vendors are chasing the money because they all believe there is money in those hills for those regulations. We saw the same thing with compliance back in the days, Jeff, and we still see aspects of that today. So I think that's one of the drivers. The reason I added the article in here on the greatest contest ever is this conversation about privacy versus security, because they can conflict with each other, as we'll get into in that article in the next segment. But the security and privacy are different topics for me in some respects, right? In that I can secure data, but I may not protect the privacy. I might protect privacy, but I might not secure the data. So there is an interesting story around this security and privacy discussion. When you look at things like GDPR and CCPA, they're trying to correlate aspects of security and privacy together. When we get into discussions in this article, what you'll start to see is where privacy potentially clashes with security and vice versa. I think this is still hasn't fully played itself out yet. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these things work their way through the court systems. But I think those are some of the drivers behind why you're seeing these kind of companies pop up.
I'm going to throw my hat in the ring here for a second and say that while I agree that security and privacy are to a certain extent different topics, however, they do work together at certain times for certain reasons. What I'm also going to say is you need a third corner to that triangle, and that's business. Because there are business reasons to use data, there are consumer reasons to protect data, there are consumer reasons to protect the privacy of data, there are business reasons to protect the security of data, and so on and so forth. And those are kind of the three different tug of wars playing at the same time. However, I'm going to throw us back into what we were talking about, which is RSA. And I'm going to ask, as one who wasn't there, what was the composition of the audience at RSA? Was it more security folk? Was it more business folk? Was it more hacktivists? What do you think?
It was more folks worried about coronavirus. That was literally a hot topic at RSA. Don't touch the doors. You might get coronavirus. Make sure you use the hand sanitizer. You might get coronavirus, right? I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it was definitely on a lot of people's minds.
Well,
so
I'll
Josh,
tell you that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
To answer part of that question, the audience at RSA is so varied. So, for example, I think it was Tuesday night. Yeah, it was Tuesday night.
Yeah, Tuesday. I know where you're headed with this.
I was meeting with financial analysts, right? Monday is America Growth Capital, so you have a bunch of financial guys coming in, looking at the markets, looking at investments. I sat down with a bunch of financial analysts, right? They want to know who's hot in the space, who's not, who to invest in, public, private, et cetera. Then you sit down with the venture capitalists for dinner, which was Wednesday night. Forge Point always puts on an event. You've got all the big VC firms pretty much there for that dinner, talking about kind of the overall trends in industry. So it's a very varied audience. I can't put a finger on what's the biggest population outside of vendors, because there's also a lot of vendor people walking around. Just for fact, right? Monday's a little slow because vendors are coming in, they're setting up their booths for the welcome reception. So if you look around RSA on a Monday, outside of the one-day events where people were actually participating, traffic was pretty light.
Okay.
Tuesday, Wednesday is mayhem, even up until Thursday. But I was at the event on Friday morning, and all the vendors had left because the expo hall closes at 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. You pack up your booth, everybody flies out. Friday morning, I walked around that place. It was like a ghost town. Now, there were people there, but the traffic drops off both before and after when the vendors aren't there. The vendor community is a huge part of the population at RSA Conference.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I suspect that, we were talking earlier about none of us went to any of the talks or sessions. I suspect that the population of attendees that are more the consumer, more people that are working for companies that would ultimately be the target audience of the vendor side of things. I think the preponderance of those people go to the talks. They're there to learn. Their companies have sent them, or hopefully or on their own nickel they've gone out there and they're trying to learn and they're trying to soak things up. They're not trying to learn from the vendor floor. They're trying to learn from the people that are coming in and giving talks. I think the vast majority of people that walk the vendor floor are vendors themselves or analysts or investors, but I think it roughly divides up that way. And like what Matt was saying, when that part of the show is over, what's left are the people that are hidden away at all the talks anyway. I wanted to ask you guys a somewhat philosophical question that relates to one of the things that I think Matt said earlier about the sort of the buzzword bingo, and let me set it up for a minute. I actually first had this thought when I was flying out to to San Francisco last week, and I was going through TSA, and I was lamenting how the TSA line is now oftentimes longer than just the regular line for getting through
the pre-check line, you mean?
Yeah, the pre-check line. But there's this new program, there's this new offering now called Clear that's showing up at more and more airports. And I was noticing their advertising slogan as I was standing in the TSA pre-check line. And their slogan is, "You are the best ID." And I just had this sort of, my mind was kind of wandering, and I just had this thought, well, when it comes to two-factor authentication, we traditionally talk about it's something you have, or something that you know, or something that you are. And to me, their advertising slogan was seeming to suggest that a single form of authentication, being something that you are, is inherently better than one of the other forms of authentication. And then fast forward to, I'm walking the vendor floor or whatever day it was, and I passed more than one booth that actually advertised as part of their buzzword bingo, "We offer 2FA and MFA." And I had fun with at least one of them, just going, hold that thought. I had fun with them, and I walked up to them and said, "Okay, what's the difference between the two?" And the person who I asked was just somebody on booth duty, of course, failed miserably to answer the question, because the answer to the question is they're the same thing.
Dude, no, I could. Okay, wait. I can see if he said we offer 2FA and 3FA and called that MFA, multi-factor authentication. I could see that.
Right.
But if you say 2FA and multi-factor, two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication and mean the exact same thing, I've got a problem with that. Marketing has gone rampant, and we have an issue here.
Well, and I'm drawing the same conclusion that you're drawing, but my question is, and I'll ask the question now, and maybe we can discuss it more in the news segment, because I actually have an article that sort of raised this question up in a different light. But my question is I think we as a security community in the last couple years, we've talked about the solution to passwords or single forms of authentication is to use more than one form of authentication. How do we solve this problem? And this I think bleeds into our security versus privacy discussion as well. How do you protect yourself from a privacy perspective? Use two-factor authentication. That seems to be sort of the magic wiffle dust of the day. This will solve a lot of your problems if you just simply do two-factor authentications. But my question is, there's like a major company out there that's suggesting, at least for getting through airport security, that one single form of authentication is not only better than other forms of authentication, but it's perhaps better than two-factor authentication. They're not saying it explicitly, but that's what's got my head kind of wrapped up on it right now.
So have you been through the Clear process? Like, have you registered for Clear or actually tried it, Jeff?
No, Matt has. Tell us about it, Matt.
So Clear is interesting because you're right. The TSA pre-check line is way too long. Everybody's in it now. So I needed to find an escape route. So I went to Clear, and United pays for it for me. So it's even a bigger bonus. But you have to register. And if you think about what you do when you go to the airport, the ID you show them is a driver's license. You better have the good IDs going forward, or your passport. Single form of authentication is your ID. Yep. What Clear does is when you register, not only do they validate your ID, they also take a biometric imprint of either your fingers or your retina as a way to authenticate when you get to the Clear station.
Your iris, not your retina.
Or yeah, you're right. Whatever. So when you, I just use my fingers. I didn't have to have the other factors. So when you go to the airport, they already have validated your ID. They've associated your biometrics with that. So when you go to the airport, you put your two fingers on. It says, "Hi, Matt Alderman. Now scan your boarding pass." Bink. Done. I don't have to pull my ID out of my wallet. I walk up to the the checkpoint, show them my boarding pass. I do not have to show them my ID, and I'm through. So it's kind of two-factor-ish in that the identity is used. Wait. It's used as part of the validation process to associate your biometrics to it. You don't have to use it when you actually go to the airport.
Matt, that's single-factor authentication.
You're right.
That is single-factor authentication. You're using your fingerprints. Here's the deal. If I took a mold of your fingerprints and used the thick ink on transfer paper, blah, 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 that people have done before, and managed to fake your fingerprints on the clear sensor, would it ask me for a driver's license? If the answer is no, then it's single-factor authentication, period. Okay? So that's single-factor authentication. Now, it's really good single-factor authentication, not arguing that, but that's single-factor authentication, which is inappropriate as per the NIST guidelines that were recently released, which says that multi-factor authentication is the only way to go.
But it also requires your boarding pass, and the boarding pass, I don't know how it validates that the boarding pass is actually you, but you do have to scan your boarding pass. So here's the test. Here's the test I haven't tried.
It doesn't. It validates that the boarding pass and the ID is the same name. The ID meaning your single-factor authentication. That's all it does. It doesn't validate that the boarding pass is you. I can buy using my credit card, I can buy you a boarding pass. You don't even have to know it exists. If I've got your fingerprints, I can then walk up to Clear, go thunk. Oh, hi, Matt Alderman. Scan the boarding pass. The boarding pass passes. It's in the name of Matt Alderman. And I go on the plane. Period. Done.
So the buzzword that I saw frequently at RSA last week, and it's mentioned in this article that we'll pick up discussion in the second segment. One of the new buzzwords is passwordless security.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So
yeah, passwords have been around for years, right? And that's why we're talking about different methods of authentication, right? You are who you say you are, and you can validate who you say you are. Right. So everybody's been looking around.
But the philosophical question that these companies are suggesting is that of the three forms of authentication, one or more of those forms is inherently better than another single form of authentication over and above two-factor authentication, and that's the philosophical I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with them. I'm thinking about it, saying, are they onto something? Do they have a point? Or is two-factor authentication really the only way to go, no matter what you're doing, no matter what the circumstance is?
Well, the major problem is that we don't have anything better that can replace it, right? Microsoft with Windows tried to do facial recognition, right? I think you can do that on Mac as well. Microsoft also instituted a PIN, USB key, smart card. There are multiple different ways of trying to say that you are who you say you are. But at the end of the day, all of those equate to a lock. Just like on a front door, locks are meant to keep good people good, right? If somebody wants to get into it, they're going to get into it. Right. And unfortunately, there's no way around that. So until we develop a better methodology for how we say that we are who we are, we have to deal with these methods. I would love to see somebody come out with a new system, a new way of thinking at it, show it at RSA and say, we've completely deleted your password.
My voice is my password. Authenticate.
It's always, as far as I can tell, there's always been three forms of authentication, and you use one or more, and usually people use one or two. I don't know if anybody would ever use all three, and maybe that is the ultimate level of security. But let's hold that thought, hold that discussion, and take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about that and some more news in Security and Compliance Weekly.